Well, if you can't beat the green team, why not join them? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And men, we're hearing from Bloomberg via finance.yahoo.com that there are a growing number of Republicans who've basically decided that since public opinion seems to be tilting in the direction of believing in man-made global climate change and worrying about such things, that maybe they need to get out in front of the parade. And I will give you an example here. Allegedly, there is a small group of U.S. senators that are meeting in small groups in Washington, D.C., including Texas Senator John Cornyn, Cory Gardner of Colorado, Susan Collins of Maine, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Rob Portman of Ohio, Lindsey Graham of Florida, and Mitt Romney of Utah. Wow, that really shows what kind of a pathetic geek I am. I just have a list of names. I actually knew where they were all from. But impressive. These guys are meeting in groups and apparently now freely using the term climate change and looking for technological solutions there too. Stephen Green, maybe it's just time to admit facts are facts. And when 74% of the American public says that they believe that there's a human role in climate change, and 64% of those are worried about it, that instead of constantly ridiculing people over man-made global warming, that maybe they need to get out in front of this parade and lead it. Do you think that's a good instinct politically, if not morally?
Oh boy, where to start? Yeah, you know what I'm reminded of? When I was a kid, I used to go to this day camp in St. Louis for a few weeks every summer. And there was this one counselor, and on reflection, I guess he was kind of a jerk, but he ran the reptile hut, which was just a little screened-in building that had a roof and screen windows and a bunch of terrariums with bugs and lizards and this king snake I used to tease, and it was pretty cool. I loved hanging out in the reptile hut, but he was always carrying around a spider or picking up a spider and carrying it around. And I finally asked him why he was always carrying a spider. And keep in mind, I was maybe like 9-10 years old. And he said, I do it to freak out the little kids. He said, they always ask me if that spider is poisonous, and I don't even look down. I just tell them yes, because all spiders are poisonous. It's just that most of them can't actually hurt you because, the little fangs aren't big enough to pierce your skin. And he knew, because he's the reptile hut insect guy, which ones were safe to pick up. And, he liked freaking out kids. So this is what I think of when I think of, do you believe in climate change? Look, I don't even have to look at the data. Of course the climate is changing. We live on a planet around a somewhat variable star, where even the continents shift around on planet Earth. The climate is always changing to one degree or another. And they found fossilized ferns under Antarctica. Okay, it's a fact. Climate changes over time. What we don't know is, are we causing it? Is the current change beneficial? Is it detrimental? If you look at the 1930s with the Dust Bowl, it sure looks like the current climate has been a big improvement over that. There are so many unknown unknowns and a lot of known unknowns. We don't have a whole lot of known knowns. And what the Republican Party ought to be doing is, instead of trying to get in front of the parade, is shut this thing down with some facts and some reason and the admission that we don't know. But you can't go on TV and say that, I guess.
Well, Bill Whittle, first of all, I guess we're all left to ask the question, based on what Steve just said, of who is responsible for putting those ferns under the polar ice cap. I suspect the Republicans. But, Bill, Mitt Romney has called climate change a critical issue. Lindsey Graham says we need to counter the Democrats' Green New Deal. Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, is actually pushing clean burning natural gas as an alternative that would be better. And it may have something to do with the refining industry in Louisiana, maybe not. We have no idea. But, Bill, what is wrong with Republicans saying, people are buying into the left's story, and so let's use this as an opportunity perhaps to push nuclear power, clean natural gas, and even some other so-called renewable energy sources? Is that betraying some sort of conservative principle to move in that direction and just recognize a fact for a fact?
I have essentially one conservative principle, and that is to try to find out what the objective truth is, and then stand over that spot. That's pretty much it. So when you say, well, the Democrats are selling the story and people are buying it, shouldn't we go along? They're selling the socialism story too. Maybe we should go along with that. So if we see if we can pick up some votes. And so once again, I come back to where's the evidence, what's the evidence, and where does the truth lie? The evidence in the case of socialism is fairly overwhelming, and you have to be an absolutely morally blind, emotionally disturbed person to not see that. Steve made the salient point. It seems to me that when the people who were calling for this emergency called global warming, it seems to me that when they changed that from global warming, they essentially lost the fight because
the left lost the fight, is what you're saying.
Yes. If you're making a case for global warming, and your case is correct, then you're going to be talking about global warming till the cows come home, or fart their way into some catastrophic earth melting scenario. But the fact that you had to change the name of this phenomenon from global warming to climate change so that you could include data that was not warming is an admission, in my mind, of a fundamental failure. So before I get to what I think is actually happening, let's just remember that in 2005, Al Gore made an inconvenient truth where he said we have 10 years to stop the planet's destruction, and if we don't, by 10 years later, it will be on an irreversible runaway greenhouse effect, and so we had 10 years. So 10 years have passed, and while the sea levels have risen a few millimeters, the only thing that's actually significantly changed over that time is Al Gore's now worth $110 million. That's what's actually risen, is Al Gore's
net
income.
worth. Yeah.
Yes, by selling indulgences for, literally that's what they are. He's selling carbon trading credits and all the rest of it. So look, if they told us that we were going to be dead in 10 years and swore up and down on a stack of Bibles that they did, and 10 years later, in fact 15 years later, there is no noticeable change in any of these variables, then somebody is lying or somebody's data is not any good. As Steve pointed out, once you go to climate change, do I believe in climate change? I absolutely do. Anybody who has any scientific knowledge of any kind whatsoever understands that the climate is constantly changing. So how do you argue with that? And why would they move into that camp? If it didn't give them a pass, say, oh well, there's more snow this year than we had in 70 years. Yeah, but that's part of climate change. So look, I actually have a decent background in grounding in actual science, and it may turn out, and it appears to turn out, that there has been some significant warming in the last 70, 80 years, especially the last 30 or 40 years. The question is, what do the temperatures look like against the baseline? In other words, I can sum this up very easily. There is no standard Earth temperature, and there is no ideal standard Earth temperature. We do have a standard atmosphere because pilots need to be able to measure whether the air is thinner or thicker on a given day, right? So we have a standard atmosphere, which is 29.92 degrees of mercury on a 57 degree Fahrenheit day at sea level. That's a standard atmosphere. It might have been 59 degrees, I'm pretty sure it was 57. That's the standard atmosphere. And we can measure whether the air pressure is higher or lower, the temperature is higher or lower, because we arbitrarily set that standard. We just set it. So there is no standard that we're measuring this stuff by. Kansas was under 2 miles of water 80 million years ago, and 80,000 years ago it was under a mile of ice, none of which we caused. So there's that entire argument. And you can just make arguments, just whole lines of defense back and forth. And one line of defense that I've never really heard is why this is a bad thing. Photographs of the Earth taken yesterday, for example, show that the Earth has not been this green since we have been able to take pictures of the Earth. Burt Rutan did a 40th anniversary showing of Oshkosh. He showed some pictures of Oshkosh from 40 years ago, and Oshkosh, Wisconsin looked like the Mojave. It was just all brown, and Burt said that's because there's now, we're no longer at the critically low levels of carbon dioxide that we're choking out all the plant life on the Earth. So yes, warming may cause the sea levels to rise. It may be a problem for Micronesia, but what about the millions of people? Here, let me just put it to you this way. They will tell you that a global rise in 1 degree of temperature will kill 40,000 people from heat exhaustion, whatever the number is, right? What they don't tell you is it will save 700,000 people from freezing to death, which is a far larger number of people who die from heat stroke. And this is why I don't trust the argument. Because all of this data fudging is all in one direction. All of the emails between East Anglia and NASA and NOAA and all the rest of it are all about, hey, well, we made this adjustment and maybe... Why? Why are you having to make adjustments? Why are you having to cover these things up? If this was actual science, it would be open to the light of day. And if it was actual science, it would be repeatable. And when you tell me that my computer model comes up with the same result as 10,000 other computer models, all that tells me is you're using the same model and you're basing it on 2 data sets, NASA, NOAA and East Anglia. So this idea that there are 10,000 scientists who agree on this, there are 10,000 scientists who dug 2 cupfuls of earth from the entire planet and have been using that data. And when the data doesn't match the model, they adjust the data. Now, all of this is not science, and all of this leads me to believe that this thing is, in fact, what I'm quite sure it is. And that is a tactic to get people to give them all of their freedom and all of their money. And they've never been looking for anything other than that. And I suspect that since the ozone hole didn't do it, and the death of the bees didn't do it, and the Africanized bees didn't do it, and the global cooling didn't do it, you got to have something.
Hey, there was, if I can butt in for just a sec, there's another case I just read about this last week, put up on Instaputted. Researchers, we have to use scare quotes for them now, down in Australia were busted shaving a full degree centigrade off century-old readings, just fudging the numbers. Oh, we have very important reasons for doing this in order to make the current situation look far worse than it actually is.
This is constantly it. They take the actual recorded temperature and then they start making adjustments to what the actual recorded temperature was 50 or 100 years ago. Well, the guy wrote down 12 degrees centigrade, but we're going to actually make it 11 because the way we look at instrumentation.
Yeah, well, we have much better mercury
is an inch
now
of mercury.
Than we used to, Bill. Much more accurate mercury today.
This kind of thing is not only not science, it is anti-science. And when you find these kind of shenanigans going on, it not only says that there's not much evidence for their case, it shows that there is in fact so little evidence for their case that they have to manufacture evidence. It's the what's his name, Jussie Smollett. Yeah, it's the Jussie Smollett method, right? I know there's a problem there. There's no evidence of the problem, so I'll manufacture evidence to make the problem that I've said there's a problem of into a problem when in point of fact there doesn't seem to be much of a problem.
And Steve, when you just mentioned that the Australian scientists got busted for that, I just immediately flashed in my mind to a picture, in a penitentiary with one guy saying, "What are you in for?" And he says, "Well, I beat a man to death with a bat. How about you?" "Well, I shaved a half a degree off a temperature reading that was 80 years old." Like, if there was any justice in the world, that guy would be in there with the guy who beat a man to death.
And we know who the prison bitch would be, don't we?
Well, there is, it's funny that the left does not remember its great scientific philosophers. And I specifically refer to the scientific philosophers who, during the Vietnam War era, sang, "There's something happening here. And what it is ain't exactly clear." That's what they should be saying to themselves. There is something happening here. What it is.
There's a man with a gun over there telling me I've got to beware. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. And that man with a gun is, of course, the federal government and the progressive left, and now increasingly some of the more pliable people on the right are moving in that direction because they think that public opinion is moving in a direction driven by science when it's actually not driven by science. It's driven by a political narrative that has used scientists in order to, by bribing them, frankly, with grant monies if their ideas tend to track in the direction of the government ideas. There's a representative, congressional member of Congress named John Shimkus, and basically he is saying, he's a Republican, and he's saying, it's not worth the fight. Let's address it, meaning address it, climate change, and try not to hurt the economy. And
What a clarion
Republican
call.
lawmakers, if when you choose to do this, what you have said is that you are nothing more than a rent-seeking politician, that all you're trying to do is keep your job, and that there are no principles that drive you. When you go from a position where you are vigorously against something and then you move to be vigorously for it without any intervening growth of knowledge or growth of actual science, then you have completely sold out. You are the reason why nobody trusts politicians. But more than anything, you are the reason why decisions like this should never be left in the hands of politicians. You are the reason, Republicans, why the federal government needs to be smaller and smaller and smaller. Because when we give control of our tax dollars, when we give control of regulating the climate into the hands of a nationalized, centralized government, devoid of real scientific reason and driven by political motivations alone, we have not only risked bankrupting ourselves, but we've risked our own lives, because politicians don't care about science. They care about getting reelected. And that goes for Democrats and Republicans as well. Ladies and gentlemen, if I've ever heard an argument for smaller government, it is this. We need to take this out of the hands of politicians. So you get a smaller federal government that does not have sway over issues like what we need to do to regulate the climate, then individuals can make decisions for themselves. Your company can make a decision for itself. If you think you're polluting the atmosphere, stop polluting the atmosphere. I mean, that's not a tough question. Or at least minimize the footprint of the pollution that you create. Everything humans do and everything the cows do creates pollution in some way or another. Some, as Bill has pointed out, is essential for life on Earth. Carbon dioxide is precious to agriculture. It is required to grow forests. We need these things. But don't let these people fiddle with your emotions by fiddling with the thermometer and stealing from your wallet to do things which cannot work, which must not work, and which we have the power to stop. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.